This weekend, France heads to the polls for a second round of elections. President Emmanuel Macron's party emerged third in the first round of snap elections. The irony here, National Assembly elections were not due for another 3 years, but he called for it. And now the far right, it looks like it is rising. Alexandre Barriere Izard from the French SA Chamber of Commerce and Simon Kuper, who's author of Impossible City, Paris in the 21st Century, join us now with greater detail. Good afternoon to you both. Thank you so much for being with us today. Wonderful. Wonderful. Alexandre, maybe we'll start with you here. This election was not due for 3 years. Why did it happen at this time?
It happened because they have an European election the 2 weeks before, and the party of Macron lose this election. That means he decide he have to call again the French people for vote. How this say, for clarify the situation, and he used the Article 12 of the French Constitution, who allow him to dissolve the French Assembly, the French room of the French Parliament, for make clear what want the French people.
Wonderful, Simon. I want to bring you in here, maybe looking at just the history of President Macron's presidency here. It was a coalition, Simon. Just talk to us about that, and maybe even what then led to the loss of this vote, the European Parliament, which Alexandre makes use of. Help us understand that one, please.
Yeah, so Macron elected... Sorry.
Please go ahead, Simon. Please go ahead.
Macron was elected in a landslide as president in 2017 against the far-right challenger Marine Le Pen. He beat her again in 2022. His majority in the Assemblée Nationale was progressively whittled down to the point where they lost the majority and have been governing as a kind of uncomfortable minority government in parliament. And his popularity has just nosedived over 7 years. And so having lost control of parliament, I think fearing that he would get votes of confidence against, he called these elections. He has become a kind of toxic president in that he has a base of about a fifth of the French population. Beyond that, is widely disliked, so much so that I would argue he's now more disliked than the far right, which was traditionally the kind of devil of the republic, that all the other parties would join together to stop the far right coming into government. The far right of Marine Le Pen, now called the Rassemblement National, is the most popular party in France. So what's at stake next Sunday is that for the first time since 1944, since World War II, a far-right party could enter French government. This time they might control the prime minister.
It's a very interesting dynamic here, Alexandre. I would like to bring you in here. We are speaking about a far right. I assume that there are also political parties that lean towards the left. I know President Macron's party was seen as something more centrist. Speak to us about these dynamics and what they represent within France here. When we speak of far right, what characteristics sit there? When we speak about left, what characteristics sit there?
The left side decided to create a coalition on all the party in the parliament. That means PS, like is just a left, and try to make a coalition with the extreme left for have the most seats at the parliament. They will normally finish second of this election. And the Macron party will be finished third of the election. And as you say, Macron is more vision central. And his belief, if you left and right, we don't really care. What is very important is what you want for the country. And the center look like now is disappear because the coalition happening to the right and the left, but go both of the in the extreme, was quite new because extreme right and extreme left never get the power in France. And that will be the first time, yes, I'll say Simon.
Yeah, Simon, I want to bring you in here. What do we make of the fact that the right, is what's rising in China? And in France, it's not only a French phenomenon, is it? In other pockets of the world, we're seeing a very, very similar trend.
Yeah, across a lot of the Western world, far-right parties, which are very anti-immigrant, nativist. So if you're born in the country and you're of the dominant majority ethnic group, then you should be privileged, are rising. And so in Italy, there is now a far-right-led government. In the US, people are expecting Donald Trump to win the election. In the Netherlands, a far-right government has just taken power. So this is part of a global trend. But as Alexandre says, one of the French oddities is that the main battle is now between far-right and quite a left-wing union. So yes, it does unite the centre-left and the far-left, but it calls for public spending. The left is calling for public spending of an order that doesn't really exist in any Western democracy. So what you've seen in France is the centre, represented by Macron, has shrunk, and the main battle is now between far left and far right. My prediction, if I had to make one, it's very hard to predict, is that the government that's likely to emerge, the parliament that's likely to emerge from Sunday's elections, might just produce a left plus Macronist coalition. So the forces of the left and Macron might just be able to get 50% plus, keeping the far right out, which would suit the far right because then they could blame all the problems of France on the existing forces and then win the presidential election of 2027, which is their great target.
Very interesting indeed. I also want to speak about the possibility here of an election outcome that could ever see France leaving the EU. I think I've read a few, extreme conversations around that. Is that even something that has been discussed here, Alexandra, that France could possibly, have its own exit from the region?
After the Brexit, and when French people see the consequences of the Brexit, like the extreme right, led by Marine Le Pen, decides to change the speech. Now nobody in France speaks to leave EU, or is a minority, because France is one of the main countries in the EU, and everybody sees the benefit. We can Marine Le Pen criticize how the EU work, but nobody wants to live now in France.
I hear that also. Simon, I also want to speak about France's relationship with the African continent here, and if there is maybe even opposing views about what this might look like, depending on whether things go right or left.
I mean, France has always tried to seek influence among French-speaking African countries through loans or direct relationships between the French president and African presidents. Macron would remain president until 2027, so he would still control those relationships. I think the main consequence for Africa is the far right is extremely anti-immigrant. They're extremely anti-Islam, and they are very suspicious of black immigrants in general. So I think that there would be a big push by a far-right prime minister if Jordan Bardella, the far-right candidate, becomes prime minister, to reduce immigration, and then for police also to start hassling and sort of going beyond the law in their dealings with black people, whether they're of immigrant origin or actual French citizens. So I think that I would call it racism by the state against black people living in France would increase, especially from police and customs officials, many of whom vote far right.
Very interesting indeed. And I also want to bring you in here and speak about just the state of the French economy. And Simon, I'll ask you to comment as well in a bit here. What kind of economy are we looking at right now? Because what I also find is that when far-right ideologies arise, it's normally because citizens are feeling very squeezed and they start to look for something a little bit more purist and capitalistic in nature. What is the current state of that economy?
What we can say, and it's not to be that, but actually France is the first country of foreigner investment in Europe. That means France attracts more than Germany, Spain, or Italy. Then people want to invest in France, but sometimes the French people themselves, they don't feel it because they have a lot of importation from China. They don't understand why we don't produce locally. And that means manufacturing locally, create job locally. I mean, they have sometimes confusion of what want French people and how they vote. The economy in France resist quite strongly to the COVID crisis because Macron takes the right decision. We was the only country, I think, in the world where the government pay when the company can't. That means he strongly supports the economy. What the consequences about the new first minister won't be so much because we are very open country and the border won't close in 1 or 2 months. That is impossible.
And Simon, keen to get your thoughts on this issue of the state of the economy.
I mean, I agree with Alexandre. The French economy is doing reasonably well by European standards. European economies do grow very slowly, but unemployment is near 40-year low. It's below 8%. Cost of living has risen everywhere. You'll have felt that in South Africa as well. Since the Ukraine war and COVID. It's risen less in France because the government has spent money to keep people's energy bills down. There is never any gratitude towards the government from voters. So there's always this feeling that the French voters tend to be, I would say, quite apocalyptic. There's this conversation around politics that France is a disaster, it's the worst country in the world, which is entirely false. There's this conversation the government does too little to help people, whereas France spends more on social protection than any other country in the Western world. People retire here typically just after 60. So I would say that the French economic situation is much, much better than voters give credit for, although the cost of living has risen, as it has everywhere. It's risen less in France than in other European countries. But of course, French voters aren't comparing to other European countries. The French tend to have extremely high expectations of government, which are disappointed by every single government.
Well, gentlemen, it's all we have time for today, and I really hope we can touch base after that election on Sunday and getting those results. But thank you so much for taking our viewers through this one. I think it's been very complex, but you've really summarized it so succinctly. Thank you so much. That was Alexandre Barriere Izard from the French SA Chamber of Commerce, and Simon Kuper, who's the author of Impossible City, Paris in the 21st Century.